Welcome to the Weather Insights Podcast. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney, along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. We're recording this podcast Saturday morning, June 29th, and we are tracking three systems in the Atlantic. We have, starting with the one furthest right, we have the area there that is now NHC has given this a 60% chance of development, Jeff, over the next 7 days, kind of following a similar path to Beryl. Of course, we have Beryl that we'll talk about in a little more detail in just a second. And then we have the other disturbance, a broad center over the Yucatan right now, expected to move into the Bay of Campeche. National Hurricane Center giving this one a 40% chance of development into a tropical depression somewhere there in the Bay of Campeche, and then quickly moving onshore into Mexico in the next couple of days, not affecting the U.S. except for maybe there in South Texas. So definitely getting busy. I think it's interesting, Jeff, those two systems in the Southern Atlantic Basin. They're staying very far south of the dry Saharan dust layer, which is allowing them to develop. And we can see that here on the infrared satellite image. That that system following Beryl is disorganized right now, but definitely getting more convection with that. Beryl, although looking very much organized, is still a relatively small system. But again, both of these systems, this active, it makes one think that they're looking at an August or September satellite image as opposed to a late June image. So the National Hurricane Center, the official track for Beryl, is forecasting Beryl to become a hurricane by Sunday, taking it into the Eastern Caribbean by early in the week. And this forecast track has taken us through Thursday at 2 a.m. And you can see the track disparity in the model guidance. As we talked about earlier, Jeff, the center of this track kind of following the GFS right now, which is a little bit north of some of the other mean ensemble tracks. But these forecast tracks should tighten up a bit as Beryl becomes a hurricane. So for the next couple of days, maybe we'll have a little bit better idea of the track, and that disparity will tighten up a bit. Jeff, I know a lot of people are thinking about the tropics, especially with the holiday weekend coming up next week. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing right now with the holiday weekend in mind?
Yeah, but like you said, is this late June or late August? I mean,
Right.
this is impressive for late June for the Atlantic Basin. I mean, we knew this was going to be an active season. We knew the factors were going to be in place, but I guess to see it actually come into fruition is a little bit different. But this is a kind of a zoomed in view of the infrared of Beryl this morning. A little bit of a question where exactly the center is. This is just a little bit too far out of the range of the recon aircraft, so they have relocated the aircraft down to St. Croix, and they will begin flying missions either later today or tomorrow out here, and that will really help us determine where exactly the center is. We can use satellite and all that. We can see under all these big thunderstorms out here, and the center at times has been embedded within this big blow up of deep thunderstorms. And then at other times, it's been over here on the eastern edge of this. And you can kind of just look at it. You can see the clouds expanding out on the west side, not so much over here on the east side. And there's a little bit of easterly wind shear that is pushing the deeper thunderstorms off to the west. And so at times, the center has been exposed out here on the eastern side of this. And so it's definitely in the formative stages, up to 60 miles per hour now this morning. And so this is definitely looking like a tropical storm on its way to becoming a hurricane. And as you mentioned, just to be clear here, this is a hurricane, potentially a category 2 hurricane, approaching Barbados and the southern Windward Islands as we get into late tomorrow and into Monday afternoon. And so hurricane watch is in effect for Barbados. We will likely see additional tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings issued for the Windward Islands as we get into later today. So that time frame coming in. So this is this is going to be a fairly significant impact here on these islands, depending exactly where it tracks and which islands are impacted. And I wouldn't discount this possibly being a little bit stronger. The Hurricane Center's been mentioning that than what they're currently indicating, and I'll show you that in a second. But this is the super ensemble. So this is the all of our big models we look at: the European, the UK Met, the GFS, and the Canadian, and all of their ensemble members. So this is pretty much everything minus some of the regional hurricane models, the HWRF and the HMON that we look at. And this is the track density out through 5 to 7 days. And the black dots here indicate the National Hurricane Center's official forecast. And so you can see pretty much right down the middle of the guidance cluster, what we call the cluster here, the cone, through 2 to 3 days. So there's not a lot of deviation, if you will, in the track forecast here through the island. So confidence is relatively high that this is going to hit the southern windward, middle windward islands, and there's going to be impacts. And then the question becomes, what happens as it gets out here into the central and western Caribbean Sea? And a lot of what happens is going to be tied to the intensity of the system. A stronger, more well-defined system is going to track probably a little bit to the north, possibly up towards Jamaica, possibly Hispaniola, Haiti, maybe even as far north as Cuba. But a weaker, more ill-defined, shallower system actually looks like it's going to turn more to the west and follow more of the trade wind flow across the Caribbean. And so, it gets into question, what are we looking at intensity-wise as we get, the central Caribbean into the northwestern Caribbean as we get into middle part of next week. And so that is kind of the question. We'll talk about intensity in just a second, but you can see the deterministic GFS here is in the green line. It's pretty far to the north compared to the European here in the red line, which is pretty far to the south. And this black line here is the average of all of this put together. And so you can see the average of all this put together is very close to the National Hurricane Center forecast track through the Central Caribbean. And then the Hurricane Center goes a little bit to the north of it as you get over into the Western Caribbean around Jamaica. So if you're in Jamaica or have plans in Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, the Yucatan, Belize, Honduras, this is something that you're going to have to keep an eye on as we go into the middle to late part of next week. And so I know a lot of people have talked about and asked, what about the Yucatan, Cozumel, Cancun? You're definitely going to have to keep an eye on this. There is some potential around the 4th or 5th or 6th of impacts in the Western Caribbean from this system. And so again, let's take a look at the intensity. So you can see pretty decent consensus here of this ramping up into a hurricane, possibly getting up into a Category 2. Would not rule out this becoming a major hurricane, especially in the next 24 to 36 hours. There's definitely some factors in play. If we can get that inner core to form of rapid intensification as this comes into the islands. And so that's why, the concern in the near term is definitely the islands for the potential of a 110, 115 mile per hour hurricane coming in the next 48 hours. But what's interesting is usually the Western Caribbean tends to be a very favorable spot in the Atlantic basin for development. And you can see here the intensity guidance kind of peaks around 3 days and then begins to slowly fall off. And this is indicating days 4 and 5 as this gets over towards the Jamaica area, that conditions are not going to be overly favorable for development. And how quickly the storm potentially weakens, or does it hold its own? I mean, is it possible that this maintains hurricane intensity, Category 2, Category 1 intensity into Western Caribbean? Certainly that's on the table. But there appear to be some factors over in the Western Caribbean, some upper level wind shear, some dry air that could result in some weakening. And how much weakening Beryl goes through is really going to be the key on the track as we talk in that 4 to 5 day time frame. And the other thing to just throw out there at this point is just this way too much uncertainty beyond the Western Caribbean of where this thing may go, what it may look like. And so, there's a lot of guidance out there. Some of them bring it into the Gulf of Mexico, some of them bury it into Central America. All of that's on the table right now. And so making any concrete deterministic answers or runs on, oh, this is coming to this place in 7 or 8 days. Really, there's just no level of certainty at this point that anything could happen at those longer ranges. And so, the best we have right now is kind of into the Western Caribbean in some form. I'm not overly convinced that this doesn't completely weaken. I mean, even the some of the stronger hurricane guidance, the H4, which is peaking this very high, drops the intensity way down at those longer time ranges there. So everything is kind of seeing some unfavorable conditions in the Western Caribbean and even in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I think it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Even the National Hurricane Center brings the intensity down some. And so we'll just have to watch it and see. Again, 5 days out, a lot can change. We're much more certain impacts to the islands, the Windward Islands, as we get into tomorrow and Monday. And then we're just going to have to watch Western Caribbean and beyond that of what this system looks like, what it may be, and where eventually it may track.
Yeah. So going back to the holiday weekend, as you said, Jeff, if you have plans around the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, anywhere there, you got to really watch this storm. But if you have plans along the U.S. coast, don't cancel your plans. This is all going to be staying south of us, at least through the holiday weekend, through Sunday. So thank you, Jeff. Great stuff as always. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Of course, you can click on and subscribe to our Weather Insights YouTube channel to stay up with the latest on what's going on in the tropics. And be sure to join us for the next Weather Insights podcast.